So now the Fed Chair, Jerome Powell, revealing that he is under investigation by the Department of Justice. Criminal probe focusing on the central bank's $2.5 billion renovation. That's happening in Washington, D.C. at the headquarters there, and Powell's related congressional testimony about it. Powell says it's politically motivated, it's not criminal. John Yoo, former Deputy Assistant AG, UC Berkeley law professor, former Justice Thomas law clerk. How you doing, sir? I have, from the category of I haven't seen this one before. So Powell goes to the video camera and releases a statement that read in part the following and delivered this way. Watch.
The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president.
So obviously that comment he thinks is about politics. What is this case about, John?
Well, Happy New Year, Bill. I think that both sides here are escalating a dispute into something, as you said, we have never seen in the history of the country. It may be the case that the Federal Reserve under Chairman Powell has wasted hundreds of $millions in the renovation of the building. But if President Trump really wants to get Powell out of office, he's only going to be there until May. There's no way any kind of criminal probe and investigation could get going and get into court in time to make any difference about whether Powell's going to remain as chairman or not. It just takes too long. He's only going to be there another 4 months. It may be something larger, though. Maybe Powell's right. Maybe what President Trump wants to do is to say, well, Powell, you're going to be on the Federal Reserve another few years, even after you're chairman. And maybe the other members of the board ought to be worried about whether we're going to investigate you. Although no, I haven't seen any evidence or proof yet that would suggest any kind of criminal charges have occurred.
Okay.
The other thing that's odd is that...
I'm sorry. Keep going. I thought you were finished. Keep going.
Okay. No. One last thing that's odd is right now, the Supreme Court is going to be hearing a case within the next month about whether President Trump just has the right to fire members of the Federal Reserve Board directly anyway. And if President Trump were to win this case, there's no need to get the criminal justice system involved. This might be a long way of saying, I'm sorry, Bill, that maybe what's really upset the president and gotten the Justice Department involved is they are trying to root out some kind of suspected wrongdoing in the what looks like overspending on the building of the Federal Reserve headquarters.
Okay, I go to Edward Lawrence on a lot of this stuff. And you're right, his term as chair expires in May of this year. But he could stay on the Federal Reserve Board of Governors for at least 2 years after that. This is what a DOJ spokesperson said when asked about Powell. They said the Attorney General has instructed her U.S. attorneys to prioritize investigating any abuse of taxpayer dollars. So went back and looked at this. The Fed is saying that all the money that's used for the renovations, it's not taxpayer dollars. It is funded by the central bank itself. And then there was this question about testimony and whether or not he lied. Have you been able to track that down yet, John?
There's two things, as you said, Bill. Did he lie? I think that's a really hard case in general ever to prove lying to Congress. It doesn't happen very often. Usually you would expect Congress to complain about it first. I don't remember people at the time Chairman Powell testified saying that he had lied. You have to prove that he intended to lie, too. So it's not a question of whether he made a mistake or he slipped up in his testimony. Did he actually intend to lie to Congress about the building of the headquarters? I think that's a really hard case to prove. This may be, Bill, you suggest, I think maybe this may be one hand of the Justice Department not knowing what the other hand of the government is doing. As we've been talking about, President Trump has been engaged in this serious political fight with the Federal Reserve and its independence. That's going to be settled by the Supreme Court in short order. It will get a decision by the end of the summer. In fact, probably the month after Chairman Powell steps down. Bringing up the criminal justice investigation, that's a serious escalation in this fight. And as you said, Bill, there's going to be a lot of hard accounting issues and other kinds of spending and what kind of plans were put into effect, who approved them, did they realize costs might get out of hand. that might be a really hard thing, again, to prove something was criminal. You could probably prove this was way too opulent. This goes too far. They shouldn't spend this much money. It may not even be taxpayer dollars, although it is money, I think, that belongs to the federal government. But was it criminal? I think there's a really high bar for the Justice Department to prove here.
So let me squeeze this in. These two have gone at it. This is from November. Here's the president.
I'd love to fire his. He should be fired. Guy's grossly incompetent, and he should be sued for spending $4 billion to build a little building. I'm building a ballroom that's going to cost a tiny fraction of that, and it's bigger than the whole thing put together.
So I'll just make three more points, and I'll make it quick, John. These two have been together since 2017, when Powell was appointed by then-President Trump. Back in 1.0. Some Republican senators are suggesting they won't confirm another person for the Fed as long as this is still out there. And then how unusual is it for, Jerome Powell, of all people, to put out a video in his defense? We don't see that, ever.
This is what also worries me, is that Chairman Powell and the Fed are escalating this too. What if they just sat on the subpoena or had never revealed publicly that they'd received them and just complied with them quietly? This is what worries me about this, is not only is President Trump pressuring the Fed, as many presidents have before, but not to this length, but Chairman Powell seems to want to throw down the red flag about this too and try to spark an even bigger political fight when he might have handled it more politically, more in a more subtle way that would de-escalate matters, not try to spark a major constitutional fight.
Well, de-escalate's the word of the day, just about every story. John Yoo, thank you for your time. Really appreciate you running through that. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Bill. Happy New Year.
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Compagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kayleigh McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.